To this virtual space. We will be engaging in building regular interfaith dialogue through generous engagement bridge. My name is Janet Cordovez, and I'm a program manager at Interfaith Youth Corps. And some of the modules that you'll see or maybe have already experienced, I help co-create or create. And so I felt I would love to share some of those resources with you today. And specifically how to facilitate these types of conversations online, as by now, perhaps you're a Zoom expert. That might be the case, but there are some tools that we are going to be utilizing for our time together that I want you to be comfortable with. You might notice that as you came into the room, you were muted, and that's just to avoid feed or background noise, the dog barking, the birds chirping, all lovely sounds in our own homes, but they kind of magnify when you're on a Zoom virtual space. You'll also see that we will utilize the chat feature, and you'll see a prompt in there to introduce yourself, and it's to help get comfortable with that space and begin creating community with everyone that will be learning about Bridge online today together. The other thing that I want to bring your attention to is raising your hand, which is in the chat box feature. Throughout our time together, there will be a portion where I'd love for you to clarify some of your ideas or suggestions. And so if you could raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then you can unmute yourself so that we can hear your voice and actually engage in this virtual space together. But with all of us on the call, we have to call out who is participating so that we don't muffle each other's ideas and miss something. So I'll just give you a second to look around in those features and make sure that you can find them. The last thing that I'll bring to your attention is on the bottom of your screen, the emoticons, where you can give me a thumbs up or a clap. So if you have that feature, if you've added the most recent download, great, high five to you, thumbs up. Because sometimes, we can nod, but as we're facilitating the conversation, we might miss those things, and it's nice to see the hands come up, the thumbs come up. Okay, we're in agreement, we can move forward. All right, so those are the tools primarily that we'll be using today as we go to engage Bridge online. And I'll just give you another 20 seconds to get comfortable with Zoom and look around. All right. So first, I want to let you know that I'm so grateful that you took 45 minutes, 50 minutes out of your day to engage in this conversation and work with me. I want you to know that I see you, I acknowledge you. I think that you are so brave and courageous for doing this work, for jumping into all of it, leading interfaith conversations, dialogues, classes, program initiatives, onboarding. And I am so grateful to be in partnership with each of you, and I'm so grateful for your time today. As we get started, I think it's really important to make this request of each other and acknowledge that we want to be here, we registered to be here, to remove the distractions. So if that's turning your phone over, if that's minimizing the tabs, if that's closing the door to your office, if that's posting a sign, please take a few seconds to do that. The second thing is that this is a conversation. So I have my hot water. My fingertips are always cold, so I just brew hot water all day and hold on to that. So that's my beverage of choice. But this is a conversation, and we happen to actually be in each other's living rooms. And so grab a beverage, get comfortable. I want this to be a community that we build together. The third thing is needed materials. It's a training, right? So if you take notes, if you need a paper and pencil, if you take notes on your phone, if you have your iPad, just grab those, open those up, and let's get ready to take some notes and some learning and some promising practices. All right, the last thing on this, let's center ourselves. I don't know how many Zoom calls you've already been on, or Skype calls you've already been on, or webinars you've already been on, but it's back-to-back meetings. So similarly to when we were in physical form, our hours were all taken for, so are our virtual lives. And so I wanted to take 5 seconds to take 3 deep breaths, to slow things down, to take a cognitive break from where we were to where we're going so that we can learn together. So let's take these 3 deep breaths. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to do a few things with our time. I'm going to review the bridge modules, just let you know some of the content, the areas that exist, pose some questions of how to utilize them. And then we're going to spend the majority of our time in 2 modules, the Facilitators Guide and the Introduction module that focuses on community agreements and creating the ideal space. I thought those would be beneficial because regardless of what training we're facilitating, some of you might have great depth with bridge material and are already continuing to facilitate. And so we can dive a little deeper into those things. But regardless of the module that you're going to be leading with, understanding how to prepare to lead those and how to create those spaces and do community agreements virtually is kind of a new thing and a new skill set. So I thought we'd focus our time primarily in those. In the future, we'll go through other bridge modules and unpack those and how to do that in online. But either if we're facilitating bridge physically or virtually, the Facilitators Guide and the Introduction module have some really great resources and considerations. So that's what we're going to focus with our time today. As questions come up, you can use the chat box or raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and we can revisit some other components as well. Like when we are creating and creating spaces and facilitating conversations in physical spaces, it's really important to engage with our community. So in a moment, we will disperse into different breakout rooms. You'll have 3 minutes in these rooms. Obviously, say hello to the person you're in the room with, but I want you to focus on 2 questions. One, what do you want to learn, experience, get out of today's workshop? Each of you came into the space for different reasons, and I want to see if I can help highlight some of the things that you in particular want to gain out of our time together. And if not in this space, I can follow up with a resource and connections or set up a time to call you. So it's really important for me to understand as a facilitator, what do you want to learn, experience, get out of today's time together? And second, which is from our concentric module and engagement activity, I'm going to ask you, if your life was a song, what would it be currently? What song really resonates with the time, space, living experience that you are having? So please take a few minutes, think about those things. You'll be dispersed into breakout rooms. Say hello. Talk about what you want to learn, experience in today's workshop, and what your song, your current life song is. And write these responses down. As you return back to the larger room, you will be prompted to add these responses into the chat box. You can opt out and decide you don't want to, but we will encourage that for each other's learning and maybe just for a good laugh. Enjoy getting to know each other. Welcome back. I hope you had a lovely time getting to know each other. I definitely did. We were laughing and then the time went out. So I encourage you to share what you're hoping to get out of today's experience in the chat box, as well as your song. And Naomi, if you could please share what we were talking about, I would greatly appreciate that. All right, so getting into today's content, the bridge modules. A lot of people don't know for some reason because we constantly call them the bridge, but they are called, and what bridge actually stands for is building regular interfaith dialogue through generous engagement. And what we do in these is create low and high risk and intentional opportunities to engage across religious difference And they are structures and parameters for thinking about how to do this work in your context, with your audience, and in your space. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about the 6 areas of content that you can experience through Bridge, and then we'll focus in on the Facilitators module and the introduction module. All right, so there are 6 key areas. The first module is the introduction module. And what you see in here is the introduction module itself, the facilitator's guide, a pre-assessment tool, some optional slides, a follow-up. And then to bring it all together, depending if you have 1 training, 2 trainings, 3 trainings, or a series of trainings, it's this badge that you can either add to your signature. And I think during this time, as everything is online, if we could print out certificates and mail them to our participants, that just might be a nice touch. But I think as facilitators, we get ready and excited to jump into the content, and there's some preliminary work within the Bridge module in this introduction area that really help us frame, tailor, and think about our participants. So for instance, the pre-assessment tool allows you to send that to your students, your faculty, and staff to assess where are the gaps, where is the learning, so then when you convene, you can highlight stories, you can highlight pedagogy, you can highlight a syllabi that is reflective of maybe where the learning needs to go and where those gaps exist. It's often forgotten, but I really think these tools just round out the full experience for you. And again, these are templates so that you're not starting from scratch and you're not starting alone, that you can alter and tailor with your faculty, with your staff, with your department chair. This first content area in particular is why we should talk about worldview. So what you see in here is a module which is about 60 minutes long in training. And I do have to say that even with our conversation today, thinking about the modules that we were going to talk about and that we were going to facilitate and the learning that we were going to have, in a virtual space, you need to carve out more time for setting, for introduction, for community agreements. So even now, as we wrote these modules for face-to-face trainings and conversations and workshops at 60 minutes, if you're doing this virtually in the next weeks or so, I would plan anywhere between 75 and 80 minutes. What you also see here is a glossary of terms. This is something that you can send out prior to your training or virtual convening, or something that you can visit together as a group and crowdsource together and define terms for your context and the different references and citations and books that your community is maybe better versed in. And the last module that you see here is a 10 to 15 minute script that highlights bullet points to engage this conversation. We wrote this up with the intention that perhaps you'll have 10 minutes at an upcoming RA training, or 15 minutes at an upcoming board meeting, or 10 minutes with your provost or president in the elevator, and what will be some high point, bullet point areas to begin to highlighting why we should engage worldview. So that's one of our newer modules, so I hope you'll find that interesting and beneficial. The second area is personal reflection, and these are just personal exploration, and it allows the participants to have opt-in and opt-out experiences. And so you go through the experience together, you do the work together, but you can decide as a participant if you're prepared, if you're comfortable, if you're ready to engage, if you're ready to articulate. And it just helps faculty, staff, and students begin to build comfort in engaging and articulating their own worldview and how it's been shaped. The engagement modules are exactly that. They're opportunities to connect with one another in multiple ways. I think these are beneficial at the beginning, woven throughout, and at the conclusion of a workshop. the question that I asked about the song is from our concentric circles engagement opportunity. There's also one that's a bingo sheet where we can now tailor that to unfold in a virtual space. I don't know if you've seen that on Instagram, but we can think about creating this interfaith bingo sheet so that we can get to know each other in that way. There's also the shared values dialogue as well as the hospitality. And so these are ways to either begin the conversation, move the conversation forward at the middle of a module, at the end of a module as you transition, if you're thinking of a 2 to 3 hour training on engaging worldview, religious diversity, or interfaith literacy. Our next content area is in exploring bias, and these modules help us explore the biases that we carry around worldview and the gaps that exist. One of them, it utilizes the case study methodology, and the second is a little bit more of personal reflection, but either they're wonderful tools to begin understanding the biases that we carry. They call the facilitator to be vulnerable and brave and share what those biases might be and where their learning occurred, and to encourage that from the participants. And then the last contact area and the most recent is the interfaith literacy modules. These modules, different from the others, require our participants to come prepared. So obviously in the others, there might be a reading, there might be a video that we infuse. There's some preparation, but you're the main facilitator. With the interfaith literacy modules, you are still the facilitator in creating that space, but your participants need to come prepared to share their worldview and engage in small groups around it. So this might be a wonderful module to have as like your third or fourth with a cohort experience, because they build on each other, and this is perhaps the capstone or like the embedded assessment where you can observe where the students, faculty, and staff are gaining their comfort. So all these modules are relevant, impactful, powerful. It depends on the experience that you're trying to create. But I wanted to highlight these for you because we've gone through them, we've taken your feedback, we've updated them, we've been very clear and explicit about our learning outcomes, assessment questions, and then we've redesigned our website. And so when we send the follow-up email, we will add in the new website. You'll see all these modules, they're color coordinated, and it's just really beautiful. And I hope that you'll love the experience as well. All right, so when you get to, after you look at all the content, you're like, okay, I'm going to facilitate this. You may be wondering, like, where do I start, which module, and how do I do this? So we're gonna focus on the introduction modules, specifically the facilitator's guide and the introduction module itself about community agreements and the space setting. All right, so let's start with our facilitator's guide. I am going to send a link in our chat if you'd like to open this up on your end and follow along and see and reference what I'm sharing. But if not, it's completely fine, because I did ask you to minimize your distractions. And if this is going to be a distraction, feel free not to open the tab. I am going to walk you through it. But I did want to give those that are more visual learners an opportunity to use that. Okay, so the first question in this facilitator's guide is really about who are we as leaders, right? And doing that self-exploration. Regardless of the module that we're training and facilitating, we will need and we will be asked to respond to, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this on this campus? And why do I think this is important? And what are my limitations, right? So we need to know ourselves as the facilitators, as the leaders, before we go ahead and facilitate this conversation for our faculty, students, and staff. As a facilitator, I lean very much on the Latin root of facile in facilitators, that my job is to make conversations facile, make conversations easier. And so for me to be able to do that, I need to do some pre-self-assessment of why I'm doing this, why I think it's important, and maybe where my limitations are. And from that process, I can perhaps ask for a co-facilitator, a co-trainer, and maybe some materials that I can prepare so that I can facilitate well. We also have to consider campus context, the history, the capacity, the approach, the audience. Who is this training for faculty, staff, students, and what's the goal? Is it student leaders through an RA training, an orientation leader training, a student leadership training? Is it with faculty and embedding interfaith components into an interfaith leadership minor? Is it with first year students and thinking about interfaith literacy throughout the first year seminar? Is it the first opportunity that your campus is engaging worldview? Is it about leading a strategic plan conversation about worldview for your campus, right? So who's the audience? What is this for? The next thing to consider is the setup and the space and timing, like how long? So today we're having a conversation that's anywhere between 45 to 50 minutes long, right? Is this the time that you need for your goal, for your curriculum? Are you planning a 2 hour and a half day? Are you planning a lunch break conversation? So how long, when, the range, the environment. Is Zoom the best space? Right now we're utilizing virtual spaces, but if you're on your campus, is it important to have these conversations out of your current campus, maybe at a retreat center? Do we need not Zoom? Do we need another platform that helps kind of create this environment of learning, engaging? So things to really think about and ponder. And then the last thing in the facilitator guide, it lists out some resources, but it also lets you know about some possible responses and individuals that might be in the room, right? And as a facilitator of bridge and interfaith leadership and just engagement across lines of religious difference, which from scanning the room, you all are experts in doing as well, you can nod your head or maybe give me the thumbs up that someone in the room is there because they've been voluntold. Someone's in the room that perhaps thinks engaging worldview diversity is irrelevant. They have a hard time letting you lead for various reasons, power dynamics, roles, personalities, past experiences with you. And then some people perhaps just want to be antagonistic, right? So we're talking about religion, we're engaging across lines of religious difference, and there's skepticism or great enthusiasm. So anyway, the facilitator's guide talks to you about the possible individuals that might be in the room and perhaps some things for you to consider as you prepare for that. So I've been talking for a great deal. I want to give you 2 minutes to think about your facilitation and things that perhaps you've done before prior to COVID-19 or that you haven't done in a while because there was a new iteration of the work that you were doing, but you're here with me now in this space thinking about Bridge Online. And I want to take our focus to that first component of us as the leaders, as us as the facilitators. So I want to give you 2 minutes to think about the questions that are listed there, but I'll read them out to you. And I just want you to write down a few thoughts. Why do I believe that worldview engagement matters? So why are you doing this? What is my personal goal for facilitating this workshop? What experiences have you had that point to the need for worldview engagement? And how comfortable am I in talking about my own worldview? So you don't have to have full thoughts, but just take 2 minutes to jot some things down as we're in this space centered around facilitating and engaging worldview diversity to answer those questions for yourself. Why does it matter? What are your personal goals? What experiences have you had that point for the need for worldview engagement? And how comfortable are you in talking about your own worldview? Great. Thank you for taking the time to do that. As you know, this is something that we can constantly revisit and think about as we train, as we facilitate different conversations. So no matter which module, which training, it's always important to be reflective and to prepare our thoughts for this. All right, so let's move into one of our bridge modules. In particular, the introduction module. You'll see a ballerina on your screen prepping in 5th position, ready to do her pirouette. One, if you don't know this about me, I'm a ballerina since I was 4 years old, took lots of classes, but this is not why I'm sharing the ballerina analogy with you today. It's to tell you that in facilitating different conversations and in a room with 20 or 30 or 5 or 100 or 500, it's very easy to lose purpose of where you're headed because conversations and points and everything is so fascinating and interesting that it can derail your facilitation and your deliverables and what your goal is. And so for this bridge module, similarly to preparing and being focused when you do a pirouette, you have to stay focused on a steady object so that you don't lose your focus and fall or get dizzy or lightheaded. Similarly with any and all of the modules is to have front and center your learning objectives. So for the bridge introduction module, there's 2. So for our time together, I'm focused on creating and identifying and summarizing community agreements that hold true to this group, the unique individuals that are in this space, ready to engage worldview diversity, and what do we need to fully participate. The second is to articulate and hold a group accountable to those established community agreements. How does that look like? I've thought about it. But what does it look like when a participant needs to be held accountable? What does it look like when I, as a facilitator, need to be held accountable? So how do I lift that up in this space proactively as we start our training so then it's not something that we do haphazardly or make up later throughout our workshop and our training, right? Does that make sense? So to help us crowdsource and think about our community agreements and what we need in this space to engage, we're going to utilize the whiteboard function from Zoom. So you'll see it pop up in your screen momentarily, and we will be taking notes. I want you to think about what you need in this virtual space today to virtually fully participate. And how do we hold the group accountable to these community agreements in this virtual community? I can tell you for on my end, it's so important that we ask questions and that we clarify things from a place of curiosity, right? So I know for me and the way that I pose questions, sometimes I'm so inquisitive that it's read incorrectly, or when it's asked of me, I feel like people are either invalidating my experience, right? And so I am so focused on asking questions where I am seeking and I am showing that I am curious about the other person's experience, and I hope and I need that same type of curiosity to be reciprocated so that I can fully show up in this space. So as we type that out in our whiteboard, I'd love for you to think of something that you need to fully show up in this space, and you can add it to the chat box or raise your hand and I will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and share that into the community. So we're seeing here respect, Yes, I'm specifically thinking about this group here together in this virtual space. What do you need to actively engage and fully participate in this conversation? We have to have agreement that we're all going to fully be present. Yeah. Colleen, if you don't mind, can I ask you to unmute yourself and elaborate a little bit on what you mean by respect? How does that feel like? What does that look like? How do you know?
Well, and I think it's probably for me a little slight bit difference of restating what you had described first in that it's an and it even connects to the next one that's written up there in terms of I'm with you, I'm in this, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, and I know that you're doing the best that you can at this point, that you're coming from a place of goodness.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you.
Anything else? Grace. Sometimes it's hard to be fully present in virtual spaces. Sandra, can you unmute yourself and tell us about the distractions or how it's different in the virtual space from the physical space? What are you feeling? What's showing up? What's different for you?
Well, I think there is something about real bodies in the same space that help keep us present. There's a lot that's going on that has nothing to do with our verbal interactions. And we're all in front of these computers that do multiple things at the same time. And often we have a lot of things pressing on us. And sometimes it's just hard to keep our attention in this space where we're not sharing our full selves in bodily form as well. So yeah, just grace for all of that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. As you were sharing that, I was thinking, we're really not sharing our full selves, right? Because you just see from the hip up, right? And all the memes and Instagrams with like what's happening and we can set up our blackboards and different visuals, right? And so what can we do as facilitators to minimize that for ourselves and the participants, right? Because I'm definitely registered for webinars that I wasn't able to make, and then I'm listening to the recordings and I have another tab open, right? So how do we do that in these virtual spaces? And I thought one promising factor and one promising practice that I noticed was that, and that's why when we convened today, I tried to say, okay, let's do these 4 things, right? Let's at least take these deep breaths. Let's get our warm beverage. Let's close those tabs, and then we have to let go, right? Because even in physical spaces, right, people are doodling and the phone is out, and so we're not fully present there idle. But this is different. This does feel different. So amid, COVID-19 and the pandemic and real grief and national grief. It's hard. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Something that can't be seen. Naomi, can I ask you to unmute yourself and tell me more about that?
Well, I don't think this is actually necessarily an agreement, but I was thinking about how, people have their bunny slippers on or whatever, like almost as kind of an icebreaker connection. Like you and I were talking about how you looked like an avatar and I have my strange thing here. I mean, I just think it's sometimes nice, like what is something in this room that, I want to show you. I've done this with my students where like people have had like I have these crazy wooden tulips because I came back from the Netherlands, so they gave me some Netherlands to bring home. I just feel like that can be a way of kind of getting attention and keeping focus, and also feeling what Sandra, I think your name is, was talking about, how like we don't, you know, we're all in our spaces and our bodies aren't there. So
Yes, yeah. So it's different, and there's some benefits, some vulnerability, some real sharing too that can occur that we can bring into the camera space. Yeah, things that currently maybe aren't seen. That's great. Thank you so much. Um, so the community agreements module and the introduction module was currently written, and it takes about 20 minutes, and it's something that you would facilitate prior to starting any of the modules to get to know the individuals in the room and what's needed. But it's also something that you revisit throughout the day, throughout the 2-3 hour training, throughout the day and a half, because you can think of these community agreements objectively prior to starting your class, prior to starting your training, and then as examples come up, as you've moved through a module, as you experience the timeline activity, as you start to dive deeply into the spaces of disagreement, these are things we need to revisit and discuss and maybe further clarify, or propped up as how are we doing, how are we living out these community agreements, and do we need to revisit them and center them? And so it's something that you can definitely do early on. You should do. It's a promising practice to do it early on. It creates a sense of community, but it's something that you revisit throughout and further clarify with your cohort and with your participants. I thought the whiteboard was a useful way of doing that and thinking about crowdsourcing together. So with that, we're gonna move back to our presentation and just do one more thing, and I couldn't have asked for a better segue from Naomi, but I do want to let you know that the community agreements I did in a very like abridged manner because of the time that we have today. A lot of times when you're doing community agreements, it's something that takes longer than 20 to 30 minutes. And depending on how large your group is, you do want to ensure that every voice is heard, right? And so in some platforms, things to consider is that the person that speaks less gets filtered further down. And so you might want to have a roster of who's participating to actually say, hey, Kay, hey, Ellie, hey, Lou, I haven't heard from you. Do you want to participate? Sometimes you have to do that call out, or something like, I haven't heard from everyone. Is someone still mulling something over? It's also really beneficial to have multiple spaces, right? So some of us, or I guess I asked individuals to unmute themselves, feel comfortable speaking in a virtual space, but there's also the chat box feature, right? So that there's different ways to contribute for however people feel comfortable doing that during the time. So as we focus on the facilitator, which is the first venue and the first question in our facilitator guide, right, where we start, we have to do some self-exploration. We have to know our why. I'm going to give you just a minute to grab something in your house, like Naomi said, which I did not discuss this with her in our breakout room, that talks and emphasizes about how your facilitation style is and how you will lean into that to facilitate bridge. So find an object close to you that expresses your facilitation style and how you will lean into that as you facilitate bridge. And I'm going to add bridge virtually because that's the space that we're going to be in at least for the next 2 to 3 weeks, right? And I'm going to ask a few of you to share it, but definitely ask you to pull it up so that we can all see it. As you go to do that, I'm going to share mine. So I keep these rocks with me, thankful and courage. And I honestly, this is a picture from my house. This is my object. This isn't, an image. I would have cited it underneath. This is from my house. And I do believe that prayer is a key that unlocks all doors. But as I facilitate these conversations on campuses all over the country, as I facilitate this conversation at our Interfaith Leadership Institute, virtually with each of you, you have to know that I lead from a place of gratefulness. I am so thankful that each of you took the time, registered, showed up for each of those events, for each of those things. I am so grateful because we could be in so many different places at any given time, and you're here and we're engaging with each other. And I am so grateful for your presence and for your unique spirit in this room. So I lead from a place of gratefulness. And I think that shows up often with my students, with my faculty, with my staff, that I am just excited to be here with you and share community with you in whatever space or campus that is. And the second one is courage. As these conversations are difficult, one of IFYC's values is grit. And so I pursue interfaith cooperation with a sense of grittiness. It takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to go back and extend and try, especially with the different types of individuals that you might have, as we list out in the Facilitators Guide, that perhaps are antagonistic or perhaps have been harmed by religion or perhaps don't realize the merit of engaging worldview. I think you have to show up in those spaces with a lot of courage because you don't know where or what the individuals are bringing into that room, and you're ready to facilitate that type of conversation. So for me, I stay courageous in those moments. So I'll give you a minute just to look around if you haven't grabbed your object just yet. I know we're being asked to do a million things, and I know prior to being online and in Zoom and in virtual teaching, I know that each of you is a phenomenal facilitator, and it's giving us this opportunity to revisit some of the things that maybe we took for granted and that we have to re-explore again and ground in. I am certain, and I always say this, and I don't think I've said it in this space just yet, but I'll say it now, is that the experts are in the room, the resources are in the room, and it is each other. And I'm just convening that and having the ability to facilitate that conversation and bring it to the forefront. As we wrap up our time together, I want to share with you the kind of experiences that I went through in building this experience for you all. It wasn't perfect. There are differences we're acclimating, but I did find some things that I think I've experienced as a participant that I'm seeing as promising, and that I've incorporated into today. Having an opening and closing activity for your community, not taking for granted that the people on the call maybe have never met each other before. This is the first time that they're convening. And if it's a meeting that you're having weekly, then maybe it's a one question or one word, but an opening and closing activity has been working well in the online learning sessions that I've been facilitating. Invite to fully participate. I only started with 4. You might want to, tailor that for your own group, for your own faculty. You might want to create those together with your faculty and staff and say, okay, we only have this 1 hour. You opted in. How can we minimize the distractions? Because right now, I don't think we can guarantee it, but what can we commit to together, right? There's a lot of front load preparation. If you haven't taken your course online, if you haven't taken your training completely online, there's so much work to do prior to getting here today. I encourage you to run a pilot run. I encourage you to have a team tech support. I have to give huge kudos to my colleague, my direct supervisor, Becca. She's on the call with us today, and she is assisting in all the tech and the breakout in the whiteboards because it is so difficult to do it alone. You can do it alone, but if you don't have to, don't. I don't recommend it. Create engagement opportunities for conversation and depth. The only way we can create a virtual community is by doing that small breakout room in the beginning, so that at least 2 or 3 individuals get to know each other. Then you feel more comfortable in the larger space. Then we can work on crowdsourcing community agreements, right? There's like that scaffolding of comfort and ability to participate, and allowing individuals to feel comfortable with the technology. Do less. Even the 20-minute module on introduction and community agreements takes a lot longer in the virtual space. So just think about your learning outcomes and do less so that you can do it in an excellent way. You can facilitate excellent content. You can achieve that learning outcome instead of wanting to do more with the full time. Record it. We're all learning from each other. Share it with colleagues and staff, so that if your colleagues couldn't participate today because there are lots of things going on, you can share with them, you can highlight some things for them, and we can just support each other in our own development and growth as we engage worldview diversity, specifically now in these virtual spaces. And then small breaks throughout, you know, that those 2 minutes just to write down some thoughts, so that you're not constantly looking at the camera, you're not constantly looking at technology. Grab your hot cup of coffee right at the beginning. Just gives you a little bit of break, because who knows, the individuals might have been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours, right? So these are some things that I came across and thought of as I was working on putting this presentation together. I want to thank you for your time. I will stay in the Zoom call. If you have any questions, I'll follow up with an email that'll direct you to our Bridge module. Our new page is fabulous. We've redesigned it. The content is amazing. As you think about doing this for your virtual communities, please reach out. We are here. And again, I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank Becca for being in this space with me today, and for being able to facilitate this with you all. Have a lovely, lovely day.